let's kick it off. Hi, everyone. Again, I'm Debbie Schwartz, founder of Road to College and the Paying for College 101 group. And I'm here tonight with Kat Delgrosso from College Ave Student Loans. And I'm going to say that the cat is back because we were, we did a session with Kat about a month ago, actually. It was September 21st, right? We did, we called it just Financial Aid 101, kind of the basics about how the financial aid system works. And if you missed that, please, you can go to the Road to College YouTube channel. It's listed there. But tonight we're focusing on the CSS profile. And let me just double check 1 minute before we get further. Just want to make sure. Okay, great. We are live on Facebook too. If you have questions, which I see everybody already has put them in the chat. This is recorded. You will get the link to the recording tomorrow. It does go up a few days later on YouTube as well. So you can always go back there and look at it. And I guess we're just going to get started. Kat has some slides she's going to share explaining the CSS profile and things that you need to be aware of. I assume, of course, everybody who's here tonight is filling it out. So why don't you just, if anybody wants to put in chat where they're from. Again, I'm assuming everybody's a senior, but if there's anybody here who's not a senior, it's good for you to just hear what you might have to do next year. But nice to see where people are from. And maybe if you even want to tell us if your student is applying early. We don't even need to know early decision or early action, just if they're applying early, so that we have a sense of timelines that people are dealing with. So sorry, I just want to make sure that I can, okay, see everybody. And okay, so Kat, if you want to get started, or maybe just flip to the next page if that's okay.
Sure.
Okay, so I did want to mention, I said that Kat works at College Ave Student Loans, and she's going to give you her background in 2 minutes because she's done a lot in the financial aid space, and actually a lot in particular related to the CSS profile. So you'll hear that. But I do want to thank College Ave Student Loans. I do a lot. Road to College, we do a lot with them. We've been working with them really, I think, almost 3 or 4 years, and they are wonderful because they really are interested in making sure
what do you want to eat for dinner?
Oops, sorry guys, if you can keep yourself muted. Okay. So I hope somebody got a good dinner there, but College Ave Student Loans does provide private student loans. If you get to that point in the process, usually around the springtime, we will do a lot more education about student loans. We will have more people from College Ave talk about the process, but they've been very committed over the past several years in sponsoring these types of events to educate people about all phases of the process, because the more educated everybody is, the parent, the students, the better decisions you'll make. And, ultimately, actually, we are all here to, reduce the amount that you have to pay in college and loans. And the only way to really do that is to make sure that you understand the process as well as possible and you're making good decisions along the way. So, Kat, I don't know if you want to go to the next page and we can see a little bit more about your background.
Mm-hmm. I'm just still letting some folks in here.
There's no files, no computers, not even paper. Check his home address too. No sign of him.
Debbie, you're muted.
Matching your description.
Sorry. Okay. Thank you. I think by accident I muted myself. I was trying to mute somebody else. Thank you. Okay. So Kat is the head of Mid-Atlantic Campus and Event Development at College Ave Student Loans. But before working at College Ave, she worked in financial aid at University of Rochester, Syracuse, and the College Board working on the CSS profile. So Kat, if you want to give us a little bit more background about all your years in financial services and even really what you did at the College Board.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much, Debbie, and welcome everybody tonight. I have spent a while in the financial aid field, and so I started in financial aid back in 1993. So time flies for sure, but I've worked at a couple campuses. I have been at the College Ave Student Loans for 3 years, but prior to that, I worked at the College Board for 7 years, just working with specifically the CSS Profile application, and also our the College Board, I should say, a process called IDOC, which we can always talk a little bit about that tonight as well. It's basically something that you may stumble on when you're applying to colleges over the next year, in terms of it's basically another College Board product that some colleges will use to collect tax returns and W-2 forms and things like that if they need it from you. So I'm happy to answer questions about that as well. But yeah, so I've spent a long time in the field, and I'm happy to, I've definitely been in the weeds, if you will, with the CSS Profile. And I'm hoping that I can help you tonight answer questions. I don't work there anymore, but I certainly know I spent so much time with it, and also used the CSS Profile at both of those college campuses listed there. So I'm pretty familiar with it from the school's perspective as well. Debbie, should I go ahead and just keep?
I think you should
rolling?
just, keep going.
Okay.
We're just going to dive right into the CSS Profile.
Okay, awesome. So this is this conversation tonight is really to help you, guide you to know what to do and give you some advice. I'm not going to, do a walkthroughs of screenshots or anything like that, as I'm, that you'll see when you're online and applying. But this is really meant to give you a sense as to what you need to know, essentially, and then I'll try to answer some questions as well. So pretty much just going to be talking about applying for financial aid in general, and filling out the profile, and then advice for tonight. So let's just talk a little bit here about a couple things that how to apply, and advice to kind of get you organized before you get going. Some of you may have already applied, actually. If you were looking to apply early decision or early action, you may have already submitted your applications. A lot of the colleges and universities have a deadline for early decision or early action. These are programs where basically you kind of have a sense as to, you might, you really want to go to that school. So you might be applying early. And those deadlines tend to be in the November timeframe, whereas if you're applying regular decision, those timeframes tend to be in the February or so timeframe. So anyway, nonetheless, as you're getting organized here, the cost of attendance I'll talk on briefly here. That's and some of the stuff I know that you guys have already heard. So we're kind of kicking this conversation into a 2.0 level, basically, assuming that you've kind of already heard about the Fafsa and some of the basics about applying for financial aid. But I do want to kind of go over briefly the cost of attendance that you will see advertised for each institution, each college or university. Includes 5 main categories. So it has, and that's true for all schools. They basically kind of, it's a definition sort of dictated by the Department of Education related to the Fafsa, and the CSS Profile. You have to have a cost of attendance at your school in order to start figuring out, okay, how am I going to figure out how much this family is eligible for in terms of financial aid? And the colleges will start with like their cost of attendance to get going. So cost of attendance, the 5 components are as follows. Tuition and fees fall into the same category. Room and board, which would also include
Wait,
any.
Kat, sorry. Did you mean the slide hasn't advanced? I don't know if you want to, I don't know if you wanted to get to that slide on cost of attendance or
actually, okay, so I'll go into, so basically, I'm sorry, Debbie. Yes, you know what? I'm going to go into it more. Let me just go through this sort of overview here. Basically, I'm sorry, Debbie. I was kind of talking about it before I got to the slide there. I was going rogue.
Right.
I get so used to it. Okay. So we are going to talk about cost of attendance. Let me get to that in just a sec. We're going to talk a little bit about the importance of deadlines and the types of financial aid applications you're, as I said, you probably already know at this sort of 2.0 sort of conversation. But I'm going to tell you what the differences are between FAFSA and the CSS profile, and a little bit about how they're calculated in terms of the bottom line, and what the family is sort of left to pay in terms of the gap. I'll go through some case studies, and then also talk a little bit about what we refer to in the financial aid world as special circumstances, things that are unique to you that aren't asked for on the application normally, and how to tell your unique story. I'm going to tell you some advice on that. Also, divorce separated families, there are lots of folks in that category, so I'm here to provide a little information on that, and can also answer some questions. And then avoiding some mistakes on the CSS profile. I want to give you some advice on how to make sure that you get it right when you filing it the first time. It's just, you don't want to have to deal with making the mistake and having to make corrections, so it's better to sort of hit it right on the first try. All right, so the CSS profile application is, this is kind of the page that it'll look like for you in terms of the application. And I'll just briefly kind of roll out here to the actual site itself. And the reason why I wanted to go out here to the live site for just a moment is if you're applying for next fall, you're going to click on the yellow button that stands out. Just to keep in mind, they're putting both school years on here because they have applicants who are still applying for the current year that we are in right now for the fall of 21 and the spring of 22. But for you folks on this line who are kind of heading into college for the first time, it's this big yellow button there for you. Also, one thing I definitely want to point you to on this site is to click on the check participating schools and scholarships. I'm going to refer to this page a little bit tonight. I just think it's important to know that not every college and university requires a CSS profile. So this will give you an almost complete list of which schools require it. And the reason why I just said that is because technically, a college, let's call it college ABC, if they don't want to show themselves on this public list, they actually can opt out of showing themselves. And you might say, well, why would they do that? A college that doesn't show on here, but from looking at their website or talking with someone in financial aid or getting notified that you have to do the CSS profile. If you don't see them on here, it may just be because they, maybe they're only asking it of certain populations or something. But to be honest with you, I'd say, probably 90%, 95% of the schools are listed here. So I would say, in general, this gives you a great guideline, but you always want to refer to the colleges and universities that you're interested in applying to, and make sure you're looking at their websites and the notifications that they have provided to you in terms of what they need. So for example, if I'm going here and I'm looking to apply at, I'll kind of stay to the top of the page here. If I'm looking to apply to I just want to look at all the schools in Connecticut that use the CSS profile. Here they are listed by state, and then so on down the line. You can kind of see of the schools that you're looking at. Let's say you want to apply to Amherst College in Massachusetts. You can see that they not only do they require the CSS profile for their domestic students, but they also require it for international. And they also require it for the non-custodial parent. And what that means is in a divorce separated situation, the non-custodial parent is really the other biological parent who is not going on the FAFSA. So you have to kind of choose, figure out which, if you're in a divorce separated situation, one of the two parents has to go on the FAFSA application and the CSS profile as the parent who is providing greater than half of the support to the student. So that's kind of the general rule. And we can talk more about the divorce separated down the line here, but there is a chance that if you're applying at one of the schools that requires the CSS profile, that they may also need you to have the non-custodial parent fill one out as well. A totally separate application, same website, same form, basically. They're just doing it themselves. And so there are, as you can see on this list, some schools that don't need that. So let's see here. Let's look at Berry College in Georgia. They only need it for the student and the custodial parent household, but they do not need it over here for the non-custodial household. So, you can just kind of look down the line here and see which of the forms are required. And this page is driven by, basically it's got CSS Profile and IDOC in it. So I mentioned IDOC earlier, that I worked with that at the College Board as well. This is the mechanism to collect tax returns and W-2 forms and some other information from families. You could also look to see which of the schools need IDOC as well. And again, I'm happy to talk about IDOC, but let me move on to continue on to our conversation here about the profile. Okay. All right, so this is where I started to lead earlier by accident, sorry, I get so excited about this topic. So the cost of attendance basically is defined in as I mentioned, it has the 5 categories. So you've got tuition and fees, and that is billed directly by the school. So you're going to see that on a bill from the bursar's office or the student accounts office. They're basically the same, but some colleges call it bursar, some colleges call it student accounts. But essentially your bill will include the tuition and fees. And then number 2 on here is room and board. And the room and board is billed directly by the school if the student is living in their on-campus housing. It could be a dorm, or maybe a lot of schools also have like on-campus apartments where they might bill you directly for the rent through them. If the student is living off campus, however, maybe when they're maybe not in their first year of school, but maybe beyond that, they would be billed if they're off campus in an apartment where the landlord is charging them rent. Essentially, the rent and the groceries are not billed by the school. Obviously, that's external, but nonetheless, the school still needs to take that into account because they want to give you the maximum you can get in terms of financial aid based on all of these things, not just the things that they bill. You know what I mean? So going down the line here, 3, 4, and 5 on my list are the other 3 categories. So you've got books and supplies in one group, and you have transportation and personal expenses. None of these are billed by the school directly. They're all unique to you. However, the institutions, the colleges and universities will, they have to come up with some sort of estimate of how much on average a student will incur through these 3 categories. Even if they're not billed by the school, the student and the family are still going to experience these things as necessary things to go to college. So you've got to buy, books and supplies. You've got transportation, meaning you've got to get to school and back. And then personal expenses would be things like, buying toothpaste throughout the year and those sorts of things that are unique to the student, of course, but they have to come up with some kind of average in order to get started with this. It's kind of like the big umbrella over top of the whole thing. It's your sticker price. Like just when you go to buy a car, you see, what is it advertised as? The sticker price is on the side of the, if it's a new car or something, you see the sticker on the side of the car. It's kind of like that. It's just that it's education. It's college.
So Kat, there's a question about when the cost of attendance is usually displayed, on the college's website. Is it always in yearly numbers, or do they break it out sometimes and show it, by semester?
No, they would give it, okay. They will, it depends. Sometimes the schools will say a tuition per semester, but it'll be very clear to you on there. Sometimes it might say, fall term and spring term, or by the way, colleges aren't all on spring or fall and spring semesters. Some of them are on a quarter system and some of them are on a trimester system, but nonetheless, we'll call those a term, one term each, throughout the academic year. They may, they usually will give you the amount for the whole year. But to be honest with you, I have also seen it broken out by semester or term, I should say. So just, make sure you're looking at the costs, and I will say this, sometimes you'll see like tuition and fees and you'll see the room and board, but like you might not see all of the other, like they'll break it down so heavily that it's there isn't like a total number staring at you. And you have to be very careful of that, because that's why I wanted to go over these 5 categories again, because all the stuff that you're going to be looking at is going to include these 5 categories. They may break it down and say like, here's tuition. And then under that, they might say, health insurance fee, or, if you're, I don't know, like they could have a bunch of different types of fees listed, but they're all individual. And then they might break out room and board by different, like I have a whole list of different dining plans and stuff. It can get almost too much, for you to look at that whole page and think, okay, wait a minute, what's my cost? I don't know what my cost is. It is certainly a little bit clearer when you can kind of see something that's just sort of, can you just sort of bottom line that for me? Where am I supposed to be here in the total? But to be honest with you, sometimes a college is trying to be helpful. So they're breaking it down to show you what you could potentially experience. But just keep in mind that you do have to know that the bottom line, that cost of attendance for your particular student is what the financial aid office is using to get you started in terms of how much money they can give you. So I hope that helps. The answer is not 100% clear, because some schools, I have seen that where it's very broken down and lots of options are there for dining plan A and dining plan B and all that stuff, but they're really using an average to come up with a quote unquote cost of attendance.
So Kat, what you just said, I'm just going to emphasize it, because I think it's pretty important that people understand. It's the cost of attendance. However, whatever these numbers add up to, these 5 categories, is like the high point, and then everything is work that the colleges is working off of that cost of attendance. So whatever your EFC might be, it's that difference between those 2 numbers.
Correct. Yep. Okay, shall I
Yes.
move on, Debbie, to pass the slide? Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about the calculation of need and how that works. So we've got our cost of attendance, and then what will happen in the financial aid process is when you apply for financial aid, they're going to calculate a family contribution. And I'm going to talk about the profile tonight, in addition to just in general, like the Fafsa produces a family contribution, and that's referred to as the EFC, or the expected family contribution. But I called it calculated family contribution here, because the schools that use the CSS profile, they calculate, the FAFSA gives them one number for your EFC, or your expected family contribution, but the CSS profile calculates a different number. And so I'm terming this as calculated family contribution, because honestly, it's going to be whatever school A calculates for their needs and school B calculates for their needs, and so on. Like, it's not always going to be, it's actually never going to be that the EFC is exactly what you'll pay a college.
So the
yeah.
so the EFC obviously comes from FAFSA. That's one number, but technically families could have different calculated family contributions at different colleges through the CSS profile. Correct. So whatever number you think your EFC is from FAFSA, that probably is not the number that the colleges who are asking for the CSS profile are using in their calculations.
Right. If it's a school that doesn't require the CSS profile, then obviously that's all they have to go on. But for those schools that use the CSS profile, they might be using some blended number between your EFC on one form versus the other. They might be using, the CSS profile number. But here's the thing, when you and I don't know if you were on the other webinar that I did here with Debbie, or the Facebook Live, but in September. But the FAFSA is going to calculate the EFC. That's really like a federal financial aid indicator. It's if you're a family that would qualify for, let's say, a federal Pell Grant or some of the other federal programs like work study, and of course the student loans. The FAFSA is producing that EFC number. It's kind of like almost like a Pell indicator, and it's truly just sort of tied to your Title IV, which is a federal term. All that federal stuff is Title IV financial aid, and you're essentially, that EFC number is pushing you to get to that federal type of aid. But for institutional aid at schools that use the CSS profile in addition to the FAFSA, they're really looking at, they're looking at more data, but I hope that by the end of this evening, you'll know that it's actually helping you in terms of telling your full story, because the FAFSA doesn't really tell the whole story. There's all of us as families here on this call, and me as a speaker, Debbie, we all have our individual lives and our individual things that we're paying for. And they might be things like medical expenses, and maybe you have a child who is in you're paying secondary tuition for high school tuition or otherwise. Maybe you're taking care of a grandparent, maybe, so it's like each individual family is unique, and the CSS profile actually helps you tell your story better. And so the FAFSA, on the other hand, is really pared down and doesn't provide that whole story. So I just want to make sure and paint that picture here early, because even though you have to fill out another form for a school through the CSS profile, if you do, based on the list that I showed you here, just know that there's a good reason for you having to do it. And the reason is because these schools on here, there's about 275 colleges, and then there's also some scholarship organizations on here too. They have a lot of money to spend, and they want to spend it as equitably as possible when you're applying and all the other people who are applying in that year. So the way to do that is, let's say American University, they want to see a little bit more data so they can figure out, okay, I want to make sure I get the right aid to the right students in terms of need. And this is, not all really talking about merit scholarships. This is really looking at the need of the family for need-based financial aid.
So Kat, there's a question, because, we're talking about this calculation that the CSS profile does, which is different than the FAFSA. And so the question from Luella asking, can you say that the FAFSA and CSS calculations are at least close to each other, even if they have different results? Or
yeah, that's a great segue, actually, the person's question, because I'm going to show you kind of visually here tonight what does the CSS profile include that the FAFSA doesn't. And that will answer your question, because if you happen to be a family that has, let's say you own a home, that doesn't go on the FAFSA, but it does go on the CSS profile. And when I say own a home, I mean value minus the debt against it equals your equity. So really the form only looks at the equity of what do you have, what do you own outright versus, so it is looking at home equity, not home value. So to answer her question, that would cause potentially your number to be further apart in terms of the calculated family contribution between the FAFSA and the CSS profile. So home is one of them. Let's say the other thing that will actually bring the contributions closer together would be if you have medical expenses that are unreimbursed by insurance. That's actually something that's automatically part of the calculation of family contribution in the CSS profile. It automatically takes it into account what you've reported. And it helps you. So it kind of, it lowers your contribution in the calculation. And then let's see what else. There are also some, if you own a business. So if you own a business and you have fewer than 100 employees, then your business net worth does not go on the FAFSA. I'll say that again. If you own a business and the number of employees you have is fewer than 100, you do not have to report net worth on the FAFSA, but you do on the CSS profile. So again, to answer her question, your calculated family contribution may kind of go up, kind of push further away from the federal family contribution if you own a business or multiple businesses of any size net worth. Basically, even if you are the single owner of a business, you do have to report that on the profile as the net worth. So
Okay.
those
Well,
are three big examples right there.
One more question kind of about CSS versus FAFSA, and then we can probably move on, but this is an important one. And it's simple but important. Somebody's asking, if the school requires the CSS profile, do they still have to fill out the FAFSA?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yes, you have to fill out the FAFSA regardless, as long as you're interested in any kind of financial aid, and sometimes merit scholarships. So there are some colleges that that need the FAFSA filled out to determine your, I don't know. I mean, they basically look at it in order to figure out how much they can give you in the scholarship side, like the merit academic, talent-based merit scholarships. And so you can kind of think of it this way. The FAFSA is really required by most colleges, and the CSS profile, so that's thousands of colleges. The CSS profile is just this one little tiny bubble of colleges. So we're talking around 300 colleges out of thousands of colleges. Okay. And the reason why that's just that tiny little subset is because they have a lot of money to spend and they've just got to figure out how to get to it. So it tends to be a lot of the schools that most of them are private colleges, but there are a handful of some public institutions in there, like the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, UNC Chapel Hill, University of Virginia. Those are public institutions that are, they just have a lot of endowment to spend, a lot of money to spend. So they're able to, they don't want just the FAFSA to figure it out. They want to be able to figure out, I need to do this better and get the right numbers here at the end and get the right financial aid to the right people. So for all their need-based aid. So.
Okay. I think we can, we'll move on, but I think we go through some of the other ones a little quickly
yeah. Okay. All right. So just real quickly here, the FAFSA this is just a summary of the types of financial aid applications. So the profile, the FAFSA, the profile, and an institutional application. So all schools pretty much most schools will require the FAFSA. We're talking like, 99% of the schools that participate in the federal aid programs are going to require that nationwide. Okay. It's free. The website is fafsa.gov. And it often links to state grant applications at the end. So you'll want to make sure to do the FAFSA regardless. And then if you want any kind of loans, if you want any kind of like the student loans, the federal direct loans for students, or if you want to borrow through the federal parent loan, you would have to do the FAFSA for either of those programs. The CSS profile is just to kind of help you at those schools who the 300 or so schools that want it, that I showed you on the website. And it is a fee-based form, but they do have a fee of $25 for the first school and $16 for each additional school. However, they just announced that their fee waiver program has been expanded to families with 100,000 or less in, I think it's the adjusted gross income, but you can double check that. But basically they have totally expanded who's going to qualify for a fee waiver. And that is, I think, an immediate change that they made for the fall of 22. And then the institutional applications would be, if a school uses the FAFSA, but they also want to get a little more information, but they don't want to necessarily use the CSS profile, they might create their own institutional form. And that's usually free for the most part. All right, so this is an example of some deadlines. It's very important that you pay attention to the deadlines that each college has, because I can tell you for sure, like the example I have provided on the right, for their early decision is the first one, and then I circled regular decision on the bottom right. That particular school is very strict with their deadlines. So if your application comes in after that date and time, you will not be given priority. Well, actually, you may actually lose out completely for institutional grants.
It is, you
So-
really have to be so on top of the deadlines, and the deadlines will be different for early decision, potentially early action, and regular decision. And yeah, you don't want to miss them at all.
Correct. And so we've got a question at the bottom of the screen. Do I have to fill out the FAFSA and profile at the same time? You don't have to fill them out at the same time necessarily, but they both launched on October 1st of 2021, this month. And that's for the fall of 22 as a starting, the start time for school for you. So for 22, the academic year 22-23 is what we're looking at right now. You can file them at different times, but the difference is this. The income is going to be based on your 2020 income. So the income is really, it is what it is, whether you file it today or 30 days from now. But the difference is the assets. So you'll have to file the FAFSA and the profile listing the assets as of the date that you file the forms. That's what you're supposed to do. So if you, for some reason, file the CSS profile like 3 months later and your assets are higher or lower, you do have to kind of list them as of the instructions tell you to list them based on that day. So, that's the only thing really that would vary for you. I would just say, make sure you're just meeting those deadlines. And outside of that, I mean, that really is that is really what your main goal is, to hit the deadlines for all the schools you're looking at. Okay, so here are the things you have to fill out for the CSS profile. And I think sometimes it's a little bit easier to actually look at my chart. So I'm going to go there first. And Debbie's going to have this available to you, this presentation. But on the left-hand side, I've got kind of like what is on the FAFSA form as compared to the CSS profile. And you can see there are a few extra items on the profile, and there's also some nuances within. So there are some of the main differences here. I did reference when that person asked a question earlier. The business net worth is a big difference, because if you have even one employee, if you're just an employee of one, you've got your own business, then you have to list your net worth. But the FAFSA, you really only have to list your net worth if you've got more than the 100 employees. The profile's got the home equity on it. So as I was mentioning earlier as well, that is not on the FAFSA. Also, if you happen to own a farm, I don't have this listed here, but if you happen to own a farm, that also is, if it's a family farm that you're living in, that, you don't have to include that on the FAFSA, but you do on the profile. And
Kat, can we go back to the home value for a second, or home equity?
of course,
Yes.
yes.
What's the best way to determine that value? Should you use tax statements? Should you go to Zillow? Should you ask a real estate professional?
Well, okay. So I wouldn't, I would just say that basically, especially now, home values have really been skyrocketing. So I guess the best thing to do, we always told people, families when I was working in financial aid, is to estimate if you were to sell your home today and put it on the market, what would be the likely price that you would put it on the market for, based on the neighborhood you live in, maybe the zip code you live in, and how the home values, how the home sales are going in your city, perhaps, or your town. The tax statements might not be spot on, so I'm not sure. I guess we didn't really, we really just advise families to use the best that they could to estimate it if they were to put it on the market today. So I guess for that, I would say Zillow, or you could, talk with a real estate agent. I wouldn't go to great lengths, I mean, per se. It's just that there are some schools who may go really far in the weeds in terms of reviewing the information that you file. So if you want to be as truthful as you can, and we don't, it's not like you normally would have to turn in anything.
Well,
from a
that
tax
actually was a
statement.
question earlier about, do colleges ever ask to verify your assets?
They may actually go, yes, they may, for sure. There's a process called verification in the federal process, as well as CSS Profile. The schools that use, maybe do or don't use the CSS Profile. So you be careful, whatever you've put down, you have to sort of be willing to back it up if you are asked for more documentation. For example, let's say you earned a lot of interest this year on your investments, and maybe you earned $1,000. Let's just say you earned $1,000 of interest income on your investments this year, and of course that shows up on your tax return. The schools that use the CSS Profile see that, they could look, and the Fafsa for that matter, if they're looking at tax data at all, they could see that you have that. And if you listed that you only have $500 in the bank, those types of things do kick out a bit, and they do cause some further review at those, at schools sometimes. So just know that if you have anything on there that looks awry, it's going to look awry to someone else too. So just, yeah, I mean, that's a really good example. We did see very often, it seems, that families would report interest income that just didn't seem to make sense with the assets that they had reported. Could be because, maybe you have another student in college and you had to cash out a bunch of things to that you used to earn interest income on in 2020, but now of course that money's gone. So just as if there is a situation like that, then you would just have to know that it has to be explainable. If someone asks you from the school side, they might ask you to explain it. So in terms of that home again, just they might Zillow the home themselves. They might look at your address and plug it in. It's a public website. So just know that they could be doing that. They might not be, but just try to estimate as best as you can on the day that you reported the data.
So can you go into a little bit more detail about retirement? Like what funds are really considered, retirement value that you would include in retirement value? Okay.
So there's two things on this slide that have to do with retirement. Okay. So one of them, I'm just going to look at the profile column here so just stay with me here on the right side of my columns here. If you go all the up to the third gray row, it says all untaxed income is included on the CSS Profile. One of the things that's in that bucket is if you have a 401k, 403b, 414h, if you have IRAs, anything where you've put money back in the tax year of 2020, because that's the year that's going to be used. If you look over all the way on the right, 2020 income is used for the next fall's application. So any money that you put back that calendar year is going to count as income in the calculation. And the same thing goes for the FAFSA. This is not unique to the CSS Profile. Okay, so whatever retirement funds you put back on a monthly basis or whatever, or an IRA, you did it at the end of the year. That's going to count towards your financial aid eligibility, because that's just how it in both forms where it's included. If you skip down to the second row from the bottom, which is what triggered the question, I'm sure, retirement value is a question on the CSS profile that's not on the Fafsa, that asks about how much have you saved over time. So if you are someone who is, 50 years old, sending a student to college, you probably, all things equal, you probably maybe have saved less than someone who is perhaps an older parent who is sending their child to college. Maybe they're 65 instead of 50. It makes sense that they would have saved some more money. Those sorts of things all kind of come out on paper here. But the truth of the matter is it's not in the calculation. It's just there as a question for the school to be aware of.
So just repeat that again so people understand that even though they are asking for much more detail about, the value of the retirement funds, which none of that is on FAFSA, it's
Correct.
that money isn't necessarily used in the calculations that go on, but that the college kind of asks it to see the bigger picture.
Correct. Couldn't have said it better myself, Debbie. So yeah. I mean, it's basically, it's not in the calculation. And I think it's very scary if you're filling out the application.
Well, that's why I wanted to repeat it. Yes.
Yeah. So I think the families who are looking at the CSS profile and you're thinking, why are they asking me for this? Am I going to have to cash out my retirement to pay for college? No.
And for honestly, parents who are older and to your example, may just have more money in retirement.
That's correct. So I think really what you have to do is realize that it's not in the calculation, whereas, the line above it, home equity is. You have to, just realize that the school might take a look at it, but really only to make sense of things. So for example, let's say someone is 65 sending their kid to college versus someone who's 50. And of course, the birth date's on there so they can tell how old the parents are in the application. And there's just a lot of thought process that goes behind it. And it's like, okay, if someone is closer to retirement, it makes sense that they have saved a lot more than this family B in their situation. Where it really, honestly, it's really meant to look for a school to look for an anomaly. Like, for example, if you have, I'll be honest with you. If you saved $1 million in retirement and you have zero saved in cash savings checking or any of your investments that are like liquid types of things, it does stand out a bit in terms of where you've decided to choose to save over time. But really it makes the most impact when a school is looking at that in relation to, let's say you're asking for more funding, you're appealing for more financial aid. The purpose of the financial aid administrator really is to look at all else equal. They're trying to say, okay, does family A have more need or less need than family B? And all else equal, if the retirement value is pretty substantial and everything else is the same, they might spend their appeal funding, their dollars for anything that, like if you had a special circumstance, they might look more favorably on a family who really has, something more modest, I suppose. So I honestly wouldn't, I don't even know if it's a required question at this time. So if it is not required, you could leave it blank. But if it is required, obviously you're stuck there. But if it's not required and you feel like it's, I feel like most families reported it, I guess. And we didn't do we really didn't use it to really a lot, other than just, it was a tidbit that we saw on the application, but I know families, it can be concerning for you, But to be honest, without it being in the calculation, 9 times out of 10, it's not going to matter.
So how about let's jump to 529 plans and maybe, and I'll just throw out the questions. I mean, the questions are, if the grandparent, has the 529, if, what about all the other siblings in the house that you're saving money for? So just kind of maybe dive into
Okay.
all the different
Yeah.
types of 529s, about who owns it and what really needs to be reported.
Okay, so the parent who is on the CSS profile, parent or parents who, so even a, whatever parent is on the application, or parents, if there are 2 parents, you would list the 529 plans that you have taken out for the student or any student in the household, would go under the parental assets. So if a grandparent has saved for the student, it doesn't go on the application, because that is not the parent who's on the application. So it's sort of external to the application, because it's not the parent's asset, it's a grandparent's asset, and the grandparent is not on the CSS profile as, all these other fields, basically.
Right. So, and to just clarify, because I think there's always confusion about who is really the owner of a 529. The student is the beneficiary. So you might, as a parent, you might think, well, I've got 3 kids, I have 3 different 529s, because I've got, each child is a different beneficiary on these 529s, but you're the parent, you own all of those. And so all of the multiple 529s, even if in your head you're thinking they're for individual students or your children, all of that money actually needs to get reported under the parent asset.
That's correct. Basically, because it is money that you've saved over time. So it's an asset. It's an asset under the parents, regardless of who it's for.
Okay, so there was a question about business, valuing business. Hold on, let me get back to that. How do you calculate the business net worth for a service business that doesn't have any inventory, machinery, property? How do you come up with that business value?
Yeah, I mean, basically, if you are in the kind of like you just basically are doing I don't know, selling Mary Kay, doing something where you don't have anything but a desk and a laptop type of thing, like, and all the, you're shipping stuff out, but you're not, you don't have a building or anything. Basically, you might end up where your business net worth is 0, or maybe negligible, like the value of, if you were to sell everything, if somebody said, I'm gonna, I have a business of, cats, I don't know, I bake coffee at home and I sell it at the holidays or something like that. Like, I don't really have any assets that I would be able to sell. So it would either be 0 or something quite negligible, maybe like the cost of a laptop or something relatively small. And I will tell you that, and that's okay. Like, if you don't have those things, then it would be kind of basic stuff that you have, that if somebody else wanted to take over and you wanted to sell everything you had to give it to the next person, what would it be? It may be a negligible amount, which is fine. Honestly, just be truthful about it, I guess. But we always just kind of said, whatever you think if you were to sell your small business today, what would it be worth? Just so you know, the parent assets are broken down pretty heavily on the application. So let me just tell you that if you put down $1,000 net worth for a business, it is really not going to, it's not going to affect the calculation really at all. It's when the numbers get larger that it can definitely affect what the asset contribution comes out as. And the way that the formulas work, both on Fafsa and Profile, is there's an income calculation and then there's an asset calculation, and then they all get squished together into, figured out as a total family contribution there. So, but I just wanted to make sure that that assets are broken down pretty heavily, and that more contribution comes from the income side than the asset side of the formulas, of both formulas really, on the FAFSA side as well. So don't worry about smaller numbers. It's really like, it's on the parent side, the assets get broken down really almost closer to more like 6% of the total assets. It's not an exact science. So it's, I gave you that number just to say that it tends to be in sort of that range of total assets.
So there was
The
another,
Oh.
real estate question about, what if your primary residence, you own, 50% of it, and then the other 50% actually maybe grandparents might own. Do you just report the 50% that
Yeah.
you're the owner of?
Mm-hmm. Yep. I mean, are they, I guess the question is, do you guys co-own it on paper? Like, are you actually jointly owning this home in terms of a mortgage, or how is that working? But normally you would say that let's say you're live in a duplex in general, like it's whatever piece that you own that you could sell. If not that they're asking you to sell your home to pay for college. I don't want to paint that picture at all. It's really just looking at family's ability to pay, and truthfully, behind the scenes, why is it they ask me for home equity? The reason is because the profile asks for it because families who rent an apartment are at more of a disadvantage than those families who have been able to afford a home in terms of earning equity, tax implications over time, and that sort of thing. So,
But do the
So, and-
calculations assume that you might, like, are they assuming that you would go in and use some of the equity to pay for college?
it's not an assumption, no. It's really more about assessing your net worth and then therefore breaking it down, as I said, breaking it down very heavily to a contribution from assets. So we're talking all those 529 plans that are in there, the real estate, maybe you own multiple rental homes or something like that. Those are all considered part of your net worth. And while it is broken down, like I said, it's very fractional compared to your full net worth, even if it is around 4 to 6% of the amount that's coming out as a contribution. If you have assets, you're at more of an advantage than someone who has no assets.
Got it.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so sorry I'm
Yeah.
going to go backtrack on this, only because I see a question and I understand that there could be confusion. And this is
Sure.
going back to the 529s.
Okay.
And they just want confirmation. If a grandparent owns the 529, what happens? And somebody is referencing, and I know where the confusion is coming from. They said in another seminar, they were told that a grandparent 529 should be listed as a student asset on FAFSA. Is that not true for the CSS profile? And so I think the confusion is what should be considered an asset, and then also when that money might be used, how it gets reported. Does that make sense?
The
So-
last part I didn't quite understand, when it might be used. Can you just
So
say that again?
so if a grandparent is owning a 529, how should it be reported? But then if money is used from that grandparent owned 529, how is that reported?
Okay, so if the money is used from the grandparent, they're probably like paying the college directly, I would think. And so it's not, well, there is a field on the form, on the profile, which is not in the form, not in the calculation, but it says how much support do you anticipate from, it could be the parent or the grandparent. So how much can basically the family help pay towards college? So in that sense, I guess the grandparents' contribution of the 529 could go there. But it's not like it's not in the calculation though, but a college will probably take a peek at that if they see that, either it isn't a required field, or it wasn't anyway. But that's where you could put the grandparents, maybe something that they were going to put in addition to the parent. So let me clarify that. So essentially the profile asks how much do you think that you're going to be able to help towards, Kat's education? And so based on my income and assets as a parent, I, regardless of anything that gets calculated, here's how much I think I could contribute. That's the number that goes down. Well, if that, plus I've got a grandparent kicking in some money, I might put that down as well. So if the family says I can do 5,000 and the grandparent's going to do 4,000 next year, then I'll put 9,000 down. But again, it's not in the calculation. It's just that it is asked on the profile how much they think they can contribute. And that's probably where you would put the grandparent one. I don't think it's on the student assets. I mean, we can go to the FAFSA and take a peek at what it says on
I
there,
thought
but-
actually if money is being used from a grandparent 529 to pay for the students tuition, doesn't it show up as unearned income for the student in the FAFSA? And so that's the
on the next, you mean on the
next
application?
year. Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
Let's see. Okay, so this is the FAFSA.
So I think that's the confusion that this person was referring to.
Yeah, I mean, I think parental assets. Okay. Paid on your behalf. Okay. Is owned by someone other than you or your parents, such as grandparents, aunts, uncles, and non-custodial parents. You must include these distribution amounts
Yes.
in 44I. 44I is this 44I is the student section. But see, this is based on 2020 though. So that's only going to really come into play once that kicks in.
Yes.
Because in 2020, nobody gave them any money like that. So,
right. So that's again, that's the confusion. It
Okay.
shows up, it doesn't show up the same year. It shows up
Right.
in future years.
yeah, so 44I is right here, right above step 3. And it says that they include money in the student section from the grandparents, let's say. Oh, that's what's in the instructions. So, but again, you wouldn't have to worry in the freshman year, but in the second year you would. So yeah, that's a great, thank you for bringing that up though. When in doubt, I always go to the instructions because that's really where the rubber meets the road.
And let me just actually, this
So-
is, even though tonight was CSS Profile, the fact that you brought up this file cat, which is it's the PDF version of the FAFSA, which I've been sharing a lot with people because it's easier to read the questions and the information on this PDF than online. So that's
for
just
sure.
a little trick. Yeah.
Yeah, I always have the PDF of the FAFSA handy because on my desktop because I'm always looking at it. But unfortunately with the CSS profile, you can't really see it. There is no paper application. However, on their website, you can get to where you can do like you can listen to tutorials, and that will at least hopefully try to seal up some of your questions that you have after this evening. And I highly recommend, maybe even going into some of those as well. But that's
So,
going to be here on this site.
Another question about, that question for how much can you contribute? And somebody's saying like, why wouldn't you put like the lowest amount you think you can contribute?
Most people do.
Okay. So it's not an unreasonable thought.
Yeah. Now I shouldn't say most people, but we actually had a lot of families who would write a very, just a reasonable number there that really did pretty much coincide with their income and assets. In the end, the colleges, they're going to use what's calculated, and if it comes out higher anyway, they're going to be using the higher, they're going to be using what's going to come out of the calculation, not so much of the offer. And here's why, like we had, it was always like a lot of lower income families who they were, I don't know, it was just sort of a pattern where they would actually offer a sizable amount for the year that was unrealistic to really what
Oh,
they
they
could
were saying that
afford.
they could pay and it was probably more than they
Yeah.
really could pay.
Absolutely. Yeah, they were often putting like higher numbers. I guess maybe they were figuring, okay, well, I might have to borrow or what, I'm not sure, but it was sort of a pattern I noticed over my time in all these years that and then, some people put 0, some people left it blank. It's just if you leave it blank, they're still going to look at your calculated amount anyway. So don't, between that and the retirement value, I mean, I wouldn't really panic about those questions because they are not in the calculation, and I believe they're both still optional fields.
So talk a little bit about taxable income. There were questions about that. Did you mean
Okay.
adjusted gross income? Like what specifically were you referring to as taxable income?
Okay, so yeah, it's pretty much going to be whatever's from what comes from your 1040 or your 1040. Yeah, well, actually, they're different names now. Sorry, I went a little old school there on that. I know the taxes have changed a bit, but basically, it's like your adjusted gross income, essentially, which includes all of these taxable income things, and then also it looks at your taxes paid, because really the formulas take into account not just what you've earned and the things that you've earned, such as wages, business income, rental income, farm income, capital gains, interest income, dividend income. Let's see here. Those are a lot of the main ones there. It's probably missing a few there. But those are, all that stuff gets calculated to come up with your adjusted gross income or your AGI, which then translates into how much you owe the IRS. And so the calculations take a look at not just what you have earned, but what you've had to push out in terms of taxes, state and local taxes, federal taxes. The calculation looks at how many people do you have in the family, how many are in college, because a larger family will get more allowances in the formula than somebody who has a smaller family, because you just have more mouths to feed and you have more people who need to sleep in your home or your apartment, and more people you have to buy supplies for, and that sort of thing. So it's not just about looking at all the money that you're making. It's also taking out and giving you allowances, they're called, for all the things that you have to pay for, which is, as you know, quite a bit. So just so you know, the formulas are fair in that sense, that they're looking at, the positives and the negatives in all the formula to come up with the bottom line. So
there's some procedural questions, which I think are pretty good, that we should let people know. One, do you have to fill out the CSS profile every year? Do you have to do it in one sitting? Can you save, what you've done? There was another good one, but okay, answer those two and I'll look for the other one.
Yeah, so you may not have to complete it every year. I was actually talking, I saw a lot of my financial aid colleagues this week at some meetings, and somebody was mentioning we only need it once in the freshman year, and then we don't ask for it in subsequent years, whereas you may find a school that needs it in subsequent years. So the easiest way for you to find that out is you can actually you can ask the school, you can ask the school when you're applying for financial aid what they do in subsequent years. Do they roll over the same amount of grant money that you had in the first year, or do they recalculate the whole thing again? Or those are the types of questions that are good to ask. And but I would say it's a mix. Some schools don't bother asking for it in other years because they figure they have a good baseline, and then other schools do like to see fresh information, and they might give you more money because of it, but because they're reassessing it based on newer information. And then the other part of that, Debbie, was
do you have to do it all at once? Can you save?
No, you can actually save the data and in a session and come back to it. So That's a good question. Yeah. No,
Oh,
you
and then,
can,
and the third question was, if you have to do the profile for several different schools, how does that work? Can you fill it out once, send
Yep.
it to multiple schools? Or, do you are there additional questions you need to be aware of that might be specific to schools?
oh, okay, that's a good one we need to mention here. So you can, you sign in here for the profile, and when you apply, you can actually add as many schools as you want based on, they'll basically have you add codes, or that basically you'll be able to get all the schools that you want, as many as you want there on the CSS profile application. You could put 10 on the FAFSA, but you can kind of keep rolling on the CSS profile. I know we had a couple years in a row, we had one student who filed over 30 for 30 colleges to get their data for the profile. And I wouldn't recommend that, but try to keep your number reasonable, or you'll have a heck of a time trying to decide where to go to school. But technically you can add all those codes in when you're applying. And what else, Debbie?
Okay, a question that a few people have asked us about Roth IRAs. Can you clarify how either a parent and a student's Roth IRA contribution needs to be accounted for?
So, and as far as I recall, the Roth IRAs would be like, if it's a parental IRA, it goes in as untaxed income.
No, but they're talking about the contribution,
So how does the contribution come out in terms of how much they've saved overall? Or
No,
how much they've put in?
how much, like if I put in in 2020, if I made a contribution to my Roth IRA, do I need to take it out and put it in, or do I just in a different bucket, or do I just calculate it in the full retirement value?
Well, any money that you put back in that tax year would fall under any kind of untaxed income. Otherwise, in terms of like overall value, you would just list it in the retirement value as part of it's just one field that they're asking for, as far as that's what it was when I left there anyway. So you would just include anything you have for retirement value in that one field.
Okay, here's another question about, what if you make a mistake? Can you go back and revise it and go in and correct your CSS profile?
It's not as easy as with the FAFSA. FAFSA, you can make corrections online, but the CSS profile doesn't have that capability. So if you have changes, you would have to email or call the school. Well, you'd have to put it in writing. So either way, you'd have to email them, or call first, ask for advice, and then they'll have you put it in writing. But basically, like if, for example, if it's tax data that you did incorrectly, they might have you send in your tax returns to show that. If it's asset data, they might have you send in something that reflects that as well. Or they might just have you put it in writing and, in an email format, and that's good enough for them. I'll give you an example. Like home equity, if you forgot to list like the debt against it, like if you were calculating it and you put the value down, but you didn't subtract the debt from it to come up with the equity, essentially, that's a big deal. You want to make sure the school knows that. So they might just take your email as good enough for that, as opposed to like showing actual documentation. But if they need documentation, it would be things like your home equity loan statements and your mortgage statement that might show how much you owe on the home at that point. And then they'll just correct the data in-house inside the college. In that case, you would have to contact each of the colleges. Because you're not making the change in a central location. You'd have to tell each college, oops, I made a mistake and here's what I did. But you have to tell all the schools individually.
So I can't remember honestly, Kat, if you have a separate slide about this, but there are questions about just what is IDOC? What am I going to have to use it for?
Yeah, I don't have a slide for IDOC, but basically IDOC stands for Income Documentation Service, and it's basically a way for colleges to collect tax data, whether it's personal tax return data or maybe business tax returns. If you are a business owner, they might want K1s or any of the business tax return data as well. W-2s, they might want proof of medical expenses. If you had something in the form that you wanted them to use, like they might ask for more data on that if you're appealing and that sort of thing. But all that stuff can kind of be uploaded into one location. So if, let's say, for example, back here on our list of schools, let's say that Amherst and Babson both wanted IDOC as well as Barnard. Now, all of a sudden, I don't have to mail this to 3 different places or email them or upload them somehow to them individually. I can actually do it through one portal, and it's through the College Board has a portal that is called, it's the IDOC process where you can send it all to one space. So it's kind of handy for the families. But let me just tell you though, not everybody, you may or may not be asked for it. So even though Amherst has it listed here, they may only ask for it from certain families. So you just have to kind of wait and see if they need it from you. Because it may not be 100% of the population is what I meant.
Okay, do you want to quickly go through some potential mistakes that people could avoid?
Yeah, absolutely. So the older income is on here because it's 2020. So again, it's 2020 income for the fall of 22-23. So if you think about it, that's old data. So if, let's say you have picked up a new job, maybe you were laid off and you've got a new job, but you make less money than you used to in 2020 and prior years, it's irrelevant. That data is old and it doesn't make sense for them to base your financial aid eligibility on that older data. So you definitely want to make sure that you put in the special circumstances section on the profile that you have, your story basically about your change of income. Now, the good news is with the profile is that they also allow you to have, they have 3 years of income data shown. One is the main year of 2020, but they also have you say very, very limited fields of, okay, what was your income in 2021 and what was your income in 2019? Or no, I'm sorry, what's your income in 2021 and what's your expected income in 22? Because they want to, it's helpful because then they can see that, wow, okay, this family's got like something going on here. And so if you want to write your story in their special circumstances section, which allows you to have up to 2,000 characters of writing your story on the application, it's great. So be sure that if you're, the mistake that I'm referencing here is to not tell them. You want to tell them your story so that they know that they can recalculate your need based on newer data, and they'll need some documentation on that. But definitely, if you had any kind of change in income since 2020, definitely make sure, and it went down. If your income went up, then I wouldn't really focus on that. It's just if your income went down, you definitely want them to take that into account. The second item here is home equity. So make sure that you do include the debt against it and the other real estate and farms, because equity is the difference. You don't want just the value sitting there. You want the equity there, the value minus what you owe against it. Special circumstances in general, you want to think through that fully. What else are you paying for that wasn't asked for on the application? The FAFSA, let me just tell you, is very minor stuff is asked for. The profile actually allows you to tell more information. So think it through. Are you supporting a grandparent? Are you paying their rent every month for $1,000 or $2,000 a month? Are you, buying them groceries every month for, however, just think all that stuff through. Are you taking care of medical expenses that are really, really high? It could be anything. just tell your story in the profiles section where they allow you to do that. And then I would like to say that some colleges, they have so many applications that they may or may not be able to take into account your story in there on the initial review, but some might be able to have the time to do that up front. Whenever you get your financial aid award, if you did have something listed there, you probably should just double check with the school to say, I just want to make sure, did you see what was in my special circumstances section, and was that taken into account? Because you never know, like, okay, if it's something that they want to talk to you further about, you want to make sure they take that into account for sure. Your retirement income, I've already talked about that quite a bit. So that mistake wise, like, those, it's not that it's a mistake, it's just things family ask about, which you've already asked about tonight. So we've covered that a lot, but the second to last bullet is about other household members in college. So that is already taken into account in the formula. So if you have older children who are already in college, you would list them as 2 in college or 3 in college in the application itself. And that is taken into account in terms of the bottom line and what the family can afford to
And
pay.
what if a parent is in college?
A parent in college is actually not supposed to be counted in either application nowadays. So if you are in college as a parent, the instructions, I believe, tell you not to list yourselves. But if you wanted to put that in special circumstances, let's say, for example, you're having to retrain because you were laid off from a job and you're having to go back to school, and you're actually going, maybe you're even going full-time, I don't know, but you're retraining in some way, then definitely put that in the special circumstances so they know that. But otherwise, it's not in the calculation for the parents being in college. And then educational loans that you're paying back. Let's say you have a junior in college and you're paying back a loan simultaneously while you've got a freshman going into school. That's a bit of it can certainly snowball a little bit and becomes a burden on your income and your assets. So that's actually not a field in the calculations, but you might want to put that in special circumstances if you are repaying. Maybe list the amount that you're paying on a monthly basis back to your lender towards, whether it's a federal loan or whether you've taken out a private loan, like through College Ave or something like that. List how much you pay on a monthly basis. And I don't know if the school can take it into account, but they may upon appeal. If it might be something they can help you with. It might not be. It's up to the school. Basically.
Kat, there's a question about another question on the form that asks to estimate your income for the coming year. Are they looking just for like an estimation of your gross income? Because you can't really estimate
Gross income.
what. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, everything on the forms is gross income, not net income. Because the net income, it has to be gross income because like I was describing the allowances in the formula earlier, a little while ago, where the taxes are taken into account, how many people you have in the household, how many are in college. There's like an income protection allowance that goes into the formula that helps families. Like it just peels all these dollars out and basically from your income, so that they're not going to be able to calculate a contribution until they get past all those things that you owe. Like taxes and buying food for your family, those sorts of things. So it's definitely gross income, but just know that the formula kind of gets it down to a net number. It's fair in that sense. Mm-hmm.
So Kat, can we jump to, I think it might be like slide 18, 19, to go through some of the examples that you have?
Yes. So this one, case studies.
Yes.
Okay, so this is a table that I created that just kind of shows you an example. It's not exact. It's just more about it's really just to help you understand that you may qualify, for financial aid. Even just looking at your income and assets, you might say, well, geez, I don't think I'll qualify. But the truth is you might, it just depends. So let's just look at the green to look at that scenario, because that basically is the same family's income and assets. I've just pulled it through with some different other scenarios past those columns. So let's just look at the green one. So scenario 1, so basically that's a family of 6 with 1 in college, but that same family, I'm sorry, that same income and assets in scenario 2 is basically a family of 3 with 1 in college. So let's compare those first. The cost of attendance at all of these, in these examples that I've got here in the green, in the top 3, are $75,000 cost of attendance. And the calculated EFC, or the contribution, is going to be different because of that family size and the number in college. So you've got a $22,000 EFC for the family that's got 6 in the family, 1 in college. You have a higher EFC with a smaller family in that example with those income and assets. And then the scenario 3, same income and assets, but now we've got 2 in college. Now it's breaking down the EFC basically in half of what it was in scenario 1, because I got 2 in college. So on the CSS profile, and essentially for this purposes of this example, it's breaking the calculated contribution down further because you've got the 2 in school. And so going back to kind of what this slide I didn't really go through per se, but cost of attendance minus family contribution equals your need. So if I do that here, we've got cost of 75 minus EFC of 22 for scenario 1. That's a need of 53,000. Whereas if you're at a same income and assets in scenario 2, but your family size is smaller, your need is going to be less than the family that's got a larger family size. It's just how it works out in the formula, because the formula protects the income more if your family is larger and if you have more students in college.
So maybe this throws a little wrench into what you just said. Everything you said obviously is valid. It is happening this year, but what about some of the changes that are being talked about for FAFSA, and do you have any sense of what that's going to mean for the CSS profile, and particularly for this, number of children in college at the same time?
Okay, not yet, but the FAFSA changes are not occurring until 24-25 now at this point. So it's going to be a little bit further down the line, but it does change. It does change because the number in college is not going to be used similarly, and the EFC is going to be calculated differently as well. I would say that, from the things I've been hearing, families they're not changing the formula so that families will be worse off. So I would look for the profiles formula to be similar in nature in terms of the family's not meant to be worse off. Even though they're changing the formula to not break it down like my scenario 3 with 2 in college, I guess from what I understand, the allowances that are taken off of your income are actually going to be higher. So in the end, I think just want you to know that when we get to that point, and let's say your student who's in high school right now is an upper class student at the college, that's when this change is kicking in. It's not meant to make you worse off. So I would just hang tight a little bit in terms, and there'll probably be some, maybe Debbie, at some point I can give more concrete examples, but the College Board and quite frankly, the Department of Education haven't really given, this much in the weeds data about the new world and the new FAFSA, but just knowing how the Department of Education works, and the things that I've read about so far and how the College Board will follow suit, I don't believe that you're looking to be worse off in the end. It's just going to be different in terms of how some of the naming conventions with the EFC changing to something called a student aid index, and some of the nuances of, you know, how the calculations come out. But it's not meant to hurt you. I think the colleges are going to have to react to the changes, and they still want you to come to their schools. Okay, so it's not like this is meant to, this new change for down the line is going to be meaning that no one can go to college anymore. You know what I mean?
So,
I mean,
so there's a
yeah.
question, and I think it'll be worthwhile for you to clarify. In your examples, right? The need comes from the EFC being subtracted from the cost of attendance. So that's this, you know, in all these scenarios, this is the example of the family's need. So the question is, does the college have to meet that need? So just because there's a need, does that mean that the family is going to get all the money that's demonstrated in the need?
Yeah, definitely not necessary. I mean, it just depends on the school. So there are some
This is where their
colleges,
policies come into play.
and also their available funding. Yeah. So let's say, for example, there are a handful of schools in the country who can afford to meet 100% of the need that's calculated. And in fact, there's some colleges that don't even package loans in your financial aid award. They kind of front load it with all kinds of grants and stuff. And then the loans can just kind of help you beyond that to help towards the family contribution. So it just depends. But I would say the majority of schools really can't afford to meet 100% of need. They might meet, let's look at scenario one. Maybe school A can meet 50,000 of the need. School B can only afford 45,000 of your need to be met. And then maybe school C can meet all of it, 53,000. I know that schools do the best that they can in general with the institutional dollars that they have, but not every college has the ability to meet 100% of need. So here's another thing too. It's like, let's say that a college has, $100 million to spend on their students that were incoming for that year. They don't necessarily know who's going to be applying and how needy they're going to be. So they have to kind of spend it knowing that, okay, we don't actually know who all is going to be applying. What if everyone this year is applying with high need numbers? They have to figure out how to equitably get it amongst the students. But I'll tell you, they'll do their best to if they can. I happen to work at a couple of schools that we met almost 100% of need. So that was very generous, and it was very, it was good for families, but not everybody can.
So to your point, what you're just saying, I'm curious, having been in the financial aid office. So how do they provide or figure out what the package might be for students who apply early, particularly early action, not necessarily knowing what the rest of the students are going to be like who are going to apply later on in the regular decision cycle?
Yeah, I mean, basically, they have historical data to know that on average, this is what we see. And in the end, if they have, 10 families with an income of X and 25 families with an income of Y and so on down the line, all of that gets averaged out. And I think in general, they're using historical data to kind of project. It's kind of like, overselling an airline as well. Like the schools know that we're going to accept more students than are actually going to be coming because they're picking where they're going and that sort of thing. Similarly, they're putting more dollars out on the table than obviously those students who will come as well. So they have to use historical data to kind of know that they on average, this is where we're going to end up. And so it takes, it's just what happens every year. They're used to it and they look at historical data to figure it out. But I don't think it, I think one of the questions you might be also alluding to with early decision is, do I apply early because I'll have a better shot at getting more money? Because if I'm applying early decision, what does that mean? That means that I really want to go to this school. And similarly, maybe not, also really early action as well. Like you're really eager, you want to do it because you want to get a sense as to if you can get in. And if this is my dream school, I want to go there. So, it's basically at some schools, they may or may not, they may treat you the same financially as someone who applies via regular decision later on. But in some cases, they may give you some preferential funding. So I think it's fair to ask the schools, is there a difference in how you award students for early decision versus regular decision? And you'll get a different answer from different schools.
There's another good question about, if the families live in lots of different places, cities, and the cost of living varies tremendously. So is that taken into account at all?
Okay, that's a great question as well. So there is the ability for, I realized that I didn't answer another question you had asked about supplemental questions. So some colleges have all colleges who use the CSS profile have the ability to, there's like a base formula that's used, and then all colleges have the ability to sort of tweak how the formula will take into account certain things or not. So they can use the base formula and that's fine. But there are some colleges that choose to use some extra things. So one of the things is to take into account the cost of living, let's say at a San Francisco versus someone who lives in the country in rural Pennsylvania or something like that. So that's actually called a cost of living adjustment or COLA. But some colleges will use that extra piece of, they can sort of add that onto the formula and how the need comes out. Because if you're from one of those zip codes that are more expensive, it will help you in the formula in terms of they're taking, maybe in the scenario one, if you are a family that lives in San Francisco, for example, maybe your EFC goes down a little bit to 21,000 or something like that, or 20,000 if you're from a certain high cost area versus someone who is from rural Pennsylvania, where the EFC might come out to the 22,000 in that example. So the COLA factor is something that colleges can use. They don't all use it, but a lot of them do. A lot of them really do, because they want to be fair to you based on where you live. So I can tell you from experience that a lot of schools really like that, and helping the families out in the formula on that one. The other piece I didn't answer earlier, but I know Debbie had alluded to it, was supplemental questions. You may also see some things in the application where, okay, it looks like for school A, I've got this set of questions, but then there's these other supplemental questions that popped up that I have to answer. Why do I have to answer those? Well, some schools can tack on questions if they want to ask you a question. They pay for that to add on some things. They may only ask one or two extra things. I'll give you an example. Like if a school, I had some schools I worked with that had extra scholarship programs that were based on certain parameters. And so they wanted to add their own custom question in here that said, are you, I don't know. I mean, I don't really remember the questions, of course, but are you from, Harlem, New York, in New York City, and you graduated with, something that's very specific to their scholarship programs. They can ask you that right in there. It's convenient for you. It's convenient for them. And they can capture that answer right there and see if maybe they can make you eligible for something through that extra question. There's some other questions that are kind of, sometimes you scratch your head like, why are they asking me that? But those might be things like, what kind of car do you drive?
I was going to bring up that question. Yeah.
So those are the ones that are a little bit more strange to the consumer, because you're thinking, wonder what what they're going to do with that information. So I just wanted to make sure to tell you that many colleges don't use those supplemental questions, but you will from time to time come upon some of them in the profile application. So anywho, yeah.
So the other thing that I think you should bring up that people should be aware of is, will they ever see what, their calculated family contribution is that the college has calculated from the CSS profile information, and that they're using in their need, offers?
Right. So they won't see the family contribution. Whereas if you are, when you're filling out the FAFSA, you get what's called a student aid report at the end. And that's the picture I have here in the middle. And it will give you an EFC. That one there says $1,702. But on the CSS profile, you don't actually see an EFC. There is no, well, you do get a compilation of everything that you filed, similarly to what is shown here, like the little top part of the student aid report for the FAFSA. You do get like a compilation of everything you filed, but you don't see an EFC on the top right of the form, like here, you know what I mean? So the college is calculated, but they all have they have nuances if they use something beyond the base CSS profile, like what I just described with the COLA, the cost of living adjustment factor. Like if school A just uses the base formula and school B uses the COLA factor, the calculation for your contribution is going to be less at school B than it was at school A, because they're giving you an extra allowance at school B. So they never want to put an EFC on there because the profile has so many nuances that every school can use it so differently that it wouldn't be very clear, it would be different at each school.
So how can somebody find out if they do want to know?
You could ask the school, but I mean, honestly, it's essentially the contribution is going to be whatever your cost is on your award letter minus the financial aid they offered you. That's really the family contribution that they're asking you to pay. Based on the averages used in the cost of attendance. So, I mean, they may give you the actual number that was calculated, but I doubt it. On 9 times out of 10, they don't really like to, if you can ask and they'll tell you if they can share the exact number, but it's essentially whatever your bottom line is, that's kind of what they'll probably tell you.
Okay, so do you want to do the last slide, which you might have kind of already gone over about, if there's anything else on it about special circumstances?
Yeah, let's see. I've covered a little bit of this. So the profile, like I said, has that space for 2,000 characters for you to type in things, but the FAFSA doesn't have anything like that. So if you are applying, well, you're all on this call tonight, which means that you probably are applying to at least one CSS profile school. But just as an FYI, let's say you have 3 profile schools and then you've got this 4th college that doesn't need the profile. They just need the FAFSA. You're going to have to also write to that 4th school that's FAFSA only and tell them what you want, what you've already told all the other schools on the profile, because there is no section for, as you probably know already, or if you filed it, there is no section for you to write that. So you'll have to communicate that information to a FAFSA only school in a different way. And consumer debt is not actually in the formula anywhere. It's not a field that you're asked for, unless it's a supplemental question the school asked. But just so you know, it's not typically considered. So unfortunately, but it's not part of the calculation. And then all of these things are really considered kind of like an appeal of financial aid eligibility. So they're going to tell you what you're eligible for, but if you have anything that's unique to you that you want to share with them, that's kind of listed here on these as examples on this page, that's kind of considered appealing your financial aid. So the nice thing about the profile is that you can put all that in up front And if the school is able to, they will review it before your initial notifications. But they can always, it's best for you to make sure that they've taken everything into account. If you do have one of these types of instances, especially with job loss and pay reductions due to the COVID pandemic and what has occurred to you possibly over the last year and a half.
So somebody is just asking, you had mentioned about writing to each college, but can they email if they're gonna
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't, I'm sorry, I made that a little old school there, but yeah, you essentially, you could type up a letter and then just email it to the school. Just look on their website they might want you to wait until your financial aid notification has arrived before you actually, appeal anything beyond, well, in the profile, you're able to put it in up front, but if it's a FAFSA only school, they might want you to wait till your financial aid comes in notification arrives before you write them an email or whatever. At least with the profile, you can tell that story up front and go with that. That's the easy way for all you folks on the call here.
So this is another interesting question, which I haven't really seen before, but it's a parent is asking, can they keep CSS form private from their student? So like, does the student have to have access, or do they get access to see this information?
As far as I know, the login is the same. So the best thing to do in that case is
Because you're going in under your child's college board account.
Yeah. So the best thing, I know that's actually a good question, because some families, they really don't want to see their 17-year-old to see how much they make or how much assets they have. What you could do is you could fill out the form together, kind of, in terms of, okay, the students got a little skin in the game and they're filling out their section, and then you kind of take over, or vice versa, you do your section and have them do their section or something. But then as far as I know, the login is still the same. So the student technically could look it up and log back in. I don't know if the College Board has changed that. I think trying to think of the best way to find out if that has changed. I could certainly get an answer, and then Debbie could provide it. I don't know how Debbie in follow-up, we could do something with that, but I could find out what the current, if they've made any changes to that, I guess I'll say.
Okay. Wow, Kat, we went through a ton. You answered a ton of questions. There are some more questions here, but they're a little bit more detailed. Maybe I will try and summarize these questions and pass them to you, Kat, in case we haven't, covered them. We are going to send out these slides, which I think are helpful. And then, of course, there is the recording, so you can go back and listen to this all again. But we are going on almost 2 hours. So thank you so much, Kat. Thank you for sharing all of your knowledge. Thank you, everybody, for hanging on this long. There is a lot of, details in this particular form, but you can get through it, and you will get through it. Reach out if you continue to have questions, but just, have all of your information with you and just take it slowly.
And also remember that the reason why they're asking for the profiles, because these are schools who tend to have a lot of funding. So it's worth the time, where you could end up with money at the end. Do you know what I mean? So
Yes. Very good point. Okay.
Thanks, Debbie.
Thank you. Thanks, Kat. Thank you, everybody here. And keep us posted. Let us know how it goes. Send in your questions, and we cross our fingers for everybody here that you get through this smoothly. Early action and early decision deadlines are coming up. So I know the next week is very hectic for everybody, but get a good night's sleep, and we'll see everyone soon.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.